This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Welcome to Permission to Speak, the video blog and podcast that loiters at the intersection of leaders who want their people to speak up, technology that facilitates connections, and results that serve our higher purpose. Now, here's your host, Kelly Vandever.
Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is Kelly Vandever, and my special guest today is Hannah Beasley. Hannah has a reputation for challenging the status quo and pushing ahead into the era of mobile, social, and on-demand everything. That mindset, paired with her experience coordinating enterprise sales and implementations, led Hannah to become the Director of Sales and Success at Red E App. Now that's red as in the color red, E like the letter E, and app like application, right? So Ready App is a mobile communications platform designed specifically for the more than 2.1 billion non-desk hourly workers who don't have a company email address. So Hannah has authored more than a dozen articles, but the one that caught my eye was one called Improve Job Satisfaction by Giving Employees a Voice, and that's what we want to talk with Hannah about today. So welcome to the podcast, Hannah.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Now, as you know, we start out with a few questions, personal questions, a couple of quirky ones to get to know you a little better, and then we transition into the more serious content type stuff. All right, so my first quirky question for you is tell us about your guilty pleasure television show.
All right. Well, this one for me, it's a pretty easy answer. I'm a guilty pleasure Grey's Anatomy fan, so that one's been around for me for a long time, and it's kind of reached a point where I just feel like they're part of my life, so I can't give up on them, even though the show has gone through so many ups and downs and some seasons where I wanted to quit, but stuck it out.
That has been like on a really long time, right?
Yeah, I mean, more than 10 years now, so it's kind of crazy.
Wow. Okay, so you're one of those faithful viewers that keeps it on the air then.
Yes, I definitely am. There must be more of us, right? Because I'm not the only one, or I wouldn't still have it on
Exactly.
year after year.
Exactly. Good. Okay, excellent. So, next question. What is your favorite possession?
So I think there are a lot of different ways to answer that question. And I think for me, I'm going to choose to answer it in my most indispensable possession, the thing that I really can't live without, and that's going to have to be my iPhone. Not necessarily for the fact that it's cool technology, but just because it really helps me run my life, keeps me sane. I have, reminders set up for everything from, hey, you need to change the air filter this month, to birthdays, to everything in between. And there are just so many apps and tools that I'm using every day, multiple times a day, that I just really can't imagine my life without it. I would hate to have to go backwards.
Yeah. And whenever we have to be without it for whatever reason, it's like crazy, isn't it?
Yes, the anxiety of no phone is very real. Even getting on an airplane sometimes where I'm not going to have Wi-Fi, that can be a struggle. But it's probably good for me. I probably need that separation.
All right, cool. All right, my next question is a little different too, but a little more serious. And when was the first time you really got how important technology is to the lives of people?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I am a millennial, so I've kind of grown up seeing technology be implemented. And I've known life before I had a home computer, but got one at a pretty early age. And so for me, technology's always been there. I've kind of always seen the impact. But a big moment for me was towards the end of last year. There were quite a few articles published about Syrian refugees and how they were using smartphones as their lifeline. And those articles for me, they were really impactful because, I thought about how lost I feel without my smartphone, without my mobile device. And sometimes we think of refugees as people who have next to nothing. And these were people who were relying on their smartphones and relying on technology to help get them where they needed to go, to help get them to a safe place. They were using social networks to connect with people, to let people know they were safe, and to figure out safe routes. So that for me was really a moment. And I'm sure if you Google it right now, you can quickly find refugees using smartphones. And there are tons of articles out there that really help show how that technology really kind of shaped this refugee crisis.
Wow. Yeah, that's a wonderful example. Yeah, you don't think about those things, but wow.
Yeah. it was really eye-opening for me. I was like, wow, I really live in a bubble, but that's so real. It's true, and it's been really interesting to read about.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, Ready app, speaking of smartphones and technology, so Ready app is designed for that employee population that doesn't have a computer, that's not got a company email address. But do a lot of those folks have smartphones then?
Yeah, well, the stats across the U.S. right now, about 74% of all U.S. adults own smartphones. And so that's going to include everybody who's 18 and over, including my 92-year-old grandfather who does not have a smartphone. So what we know about those numbers is that they're good number. They're growing every single year, and they're higher in certain demographics, right? So urban employees more likely to have a smartphone. One of the things that's a common misconception is that employees who maybe make a lower income are less likely to own a smartphone. And that's a misconception because in reality, those employees are what we call smartphone dependent. So their only primary connection to the internet is going to be a smartphone. They might have never owned a home computer or a tablet, but they've got a smartphone. You can get a smartphone basically free with a plan at a lot of providers now. And so common misconception that hourly employees aren't big smartphone users, and the stats can tell you they definitely are, and the numbers are growing every day.
Okay, that makes sense. So you guys have made it a point to narrow in on that niche in the marketplace. So I'm wondering, you've already answered the question, are they going to have smartphones? And the answer is yes to that. But what are some of the challenges in for companies that have a lot of hourly workers, or that workers that don't have that company email address? What are some of the challenges in getting that communication up and down the chain of command, if you will?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's something I'm super familiar with. I actually just got off a phone call with someone right now, and she's telling me, hey, more than half of my employees don't have company email. So, well, how do you communicate with them now? And she told me what everyone tells me, which is, we're relying on our managers. So we communicate to our managers via email or another channel, and then we're relying on them to get the message out. We're posting things on bulletin boards. We're sending out snail mail sometimes, right? So relying on those traditional methods. But the challenge, there's really a couple of big challenges with that. First and foremost is that communication is almost never real time, right? So if you've got something that really needs to be communicated in the next hour, if you're relying on trickle-down communication, oftentimes you're not going to reach everyone within the hour. A lot of times that message can also get warped. So you say one thing, manager A says one thing, manager B says another thing, and by the time your frontline employees hear it, it sounds completely different. So that can be another big challenge. And the other piece is really, really hard for communications to come back up the chain of command. So you've got one challenge of getting it to come top down, and a whole nother challenge getting that communication to come back up. I've walked around lots of manufacturing facilities in the last couple of years and seen paper suggestion boxes still in the break rooms for employees to submit their suggestions, because there's just not a better way if there's no digital channel there available for those employees. So really, really tough if you don't have all your employees digitally connected.
So why would somebody use an app like Ready App as opposed to using that paper suggestion box? What are some of the things that you see?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, it's a lot slower to get suggestions that way, right? And that can take days, weeks, and by the time you get the message, it could be completely irrelevant. Another piece is talking about employee preferences, right? So we've got to make sure that as communicators, we're communicating to people in a way they want to receive it. And more the trends are showing that people want to receive communications directly on their mobile device. If I'm getting my news from my mobile device, if I'm getting everything else in my life directly from my smartphone, why can't I hear from my company there too?
Yeah.
So employee preferences are a big deal. Real-time communications are a big deal. And then analytics is another piece that we don't always think of, but with any digital tool, you're able to kind of get some measurement around your communications for the first time, and that's a really neat thing.
So can you give us some examples of how organizations, I think it's pretty obvious how the top-down could work if they're using this app and they get the communications on their phone. How about the bottom-up? What does that look like? in the organizations you work with?
Yeah, so I'll give you a great example. So we have a customer that's using our app very extensively in their organization. They've got more employees connected on Ready App than they do on email, and so they really love it, and it's really transforming the way they communicate. And one of their managers, I actually saw this last week, is really taking the time to communicate with his employees directly. So he has a group just for his employees directly on his smartphone. He'll push out a message to them, and then employees can respond directly to him. The messages just come back to him. And he's asked for suggestions that way directly, and then been able to reply later that week to say, hey, here's all the suggestions that I heard. Here's my response to each one of them. And that really gives employees a voice, even if the answer is no, even if the answer is, hey, we just can't do anything about this right now. It's really, really impactful for those employees to know, okay, someone paid attention to my request. Someone cared enough and valued me enough to respond, even if the answer is no. So it's been pretty neat to watch.
Very cool, very cool. So when with these companies that are coming to you, what's their impetus? What's going on in their organization that makes them say, "We've got to figure something out because what we're doing now is not working"?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. People come to us for a variety of different reasons. It could be that they had a crisis. We always see a huge spike in Ready App users during events like, unfortunately, Hurricane Matthew that happened last week. So a crisis, and you realize suddenly, hey, our need to communicate is incredible, and we still don't have a good way to do this. So people just reaching that breaking point of frustration through a crisis or through something else that happens. And then generally there's an innovator or a technology champion at the organization that says, you know what, there's got to be a better way to do this, and really takes it on as a project, as a mission, to try to bridge that communication gap for that workforce.
Okay, and why Ready App? Is it because of your niche there and the hourly worker, non-email type worker that you think that helps? That's one of the reasons clients pick you, or?
Yeah, we really believe that we know this worker better than anyone. We've done a tremendous amount of research specifically around the non-desk worker. We've designed our interfaces for this workforce. Probably even most people listening to this podcast are what we call knowledge workers, right? People who sit at a desk all day. You've got a wide variety of digital tools at your disposal all the time. And what we know is that this non-desk worker is really different. And so our focus in that area is certainly a reason why people choose us, because what that's meant is that we've built our technology differently. We've built it to meet those needs specifically, to have targeted communications, to have connection without as much chaos, to have focused communication, less noise, right? More signal. So all of that comes together to really be the best possible platform for this workforce and for connecting them.
So what is different about this workforce than say the knowledge worker?
Well, I think it kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier about them being smartphone dependent. So there's a large portion of this workforce that is smartphone dependent. So when we think about our tools for work, we think about our computer, we think about our office. These guys, their tools for work might be a hard hat. They might be a waitress apron, right? Maybe bartending tools. But their smartphone is attached to them at all times. And so many of the things that we take for granted, they've never had access to. When we think about buying technology for ourselves, we're trying to improve or optimize a part of our work. And when we think about buying technology for this worker, these are people that have never really had access to good technology at work. So there's that piece. Depending on the industry, this can vary a little bit, but for the most part, it is a heavy millennial workforce, the hourly workforce. A lot of those jobs are filled by millennials. They tend to have higher turnover. And so that's a huge area where we really feel like mobile platforms and increased communication can make a difference. If we can even help reduce your turnover by 0.5%, for a lot of companies, that represents millions of dollars every year. And so it's really just an untapped opportunity to engage those workers in a different way.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, you in one of your articles, I'm sorry, I switched gears a little bit there. I thought I was going to go with one question. I'm going to go a different way, but I'll get to that. I'll get back to that one question. So you wrote another article, and you talk about in Facebook one of these employees that we were just talking about, Mike, the guy from McDonald's that did a Facebook post. Would you mind sharing that story and some of the conclusions you came to it when you were reading it based on your work, with these employees?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give our listeners some context, this was an article that was posted as a result of a Facebook post that went viral. We've all seen those Facebook posts that kind of go nuts and get reposted a million times. And this was one of those. And this guy named Mike, who was a McDonald's employee, and he posted on Facebook because he was just so sick of the way people perceived him just because he worked at McDonald's. And one thing I didn't mention in the blog post is this really hit home for me because when I was a teenager, I wrote down in my journal, I will never say, do you want fries with that? And a couple of months later, I started my first job at Sonic, where I didn't say, do you want fries with that? But I certainly said, would you like fries or tater tots? So I get this space. I understand, the perception that can be associated, and especially McDonald's, I think that has a particular vision that comes to people's minds when they think about working at McDonald's. But Mike made this post because he was working 50 hours a week while pursuing his degree. And he has hopes and dreams and goals, and he was sharing about how much he had learned in his job at McDonald's and how much he liked it and how much he appreciated his coworkers. And he was so sick of people viewing it a certain way when he viewed it as a stepping stone into him reaching his hopes and his dreams and his goals. And so when I read this, I thought, man, I wish every employer could read this because it should be such a wake-up call to them. You've got to support your employees wherever they are in life, and you've got to see them as humans. Ask them what they want. Ask them what they need. Treat them like they have great value because they do. And, I'm thinking somebody like Mike, man, they should be, that could be a future leader in McDonald's. This is somebody who could really make an impact on the organization. And so related to that, one of the things that we often ask companies that we work with is, so what do you call your hourly employee? And we talk to companies, some people will call them team members. Some people will call them employees. Some people will call them our workforce. Some people, and even Disney will call them cast members, right? So that's a fun one. But what we've noticed is you can tell a lot about how people view their employees and how people treat their employees by what they call them. Because people who call their employees team members are really sending a message to those employees. Hey, you're a part of a team. We're in this together. Everyone's part matters. We're working towards the same goals. It's a player-coach mentality versus a boss-minion mentality, right? It's not the same thing. And every single thing in an organization communicates whether or not you value your employees. And so I read that article and I just thought, man, I just want to take this and I want to share it with everybody I've ever talked to because this is such an important concept for managers to grasp if they want to build great organizations.
Very good, very good. I interviewed somebody named Nora Burns for an earlier podcast, and she has some great stories too from when she went undercover as an employee in some organizations, and reiterate. Well, she says the same thing you did in that their stories are amazing. They have great dreams, great hopes, and goals in their life, and getting to know them is you see what value that they bring and that they do really care about what's going on.
Yeah. And I think one of the things our research has shown is that hourly employees are more dedicated and more loyal than you think they are. And so, like I mentioned earlier, if your turnover is high, it does make a difference if you can reduce it by just a fraction of a percent, and caring about your employees is a great place to start.
Very good.
It's a no-brainer, right? I think I should not have to say out loud.
But yeah, absolutely. So this idea of helping employees speak up and how do you engage more? Are there certain characteristics that a company needs to have? You talked about team members versus employees or whatever. Is there a particular type of culture or things that organizations need to have in place to really get the benefit out of an app like this with the communication up and down the chain?
Yeah, I really think that nearly anyone could benefit from it, but some companies are going to be more poised to see it take off more quickly, right? If you've built a lot of trust with your employees already, then saying, hey, we want to communicate with you, go ahead and download this on your smartphone is going to be less of an ask versus if you have a culture where your employees already don't trust you, they may be more hesitant. They might see it as corporate propaganda, right? So that's always a barrier that some organizations are going to face. But to me, that's not a reason to not try, right? That's not a reason why you shouldn't take an extra step and say, you know what, I realize we've done some things as a company that might have worn down your trust, but this is a step we're taking in the right direction. I've seen a lot of organizations implement something like Ready App after an employee survey. One organization I'm thinking of in particular, they surveyed their employees and said, hey, how do you want to receive communications? And when employees responded with mobile being one of their top things, and with better communications being one of their top needs, they responded and they let employees know when they rolled out the solution, hey, this is in direct response to some feedback that you gave us. So I think that, there aren't necessarily certain things that have to be in place, but certain companies are going to have an easier time than others. Doesn't mean it's not an effort that you shouldn't fight towards, but your adoption is going to be slower and you're rebuilding trust and you're rebuilding that connection over time.
Okay, so what are some things that help aid adoption in these companies that are using Ready App, for instance?
Yeah, I like to call this finding your triggers. And so this is figuring out what is it that your employees really want and need. Because if all you have is your corporate agenda, your employees are going to probably see right through that, as they normally do, right? We've all maybe worked in large corporate environments. You get an email, you're like, oh man, that's just a corporate email, just another, filled with jargon, filled with businessy words, and certainly your hourly employees are not going to give that the time of day. So in every single implementation that we do, we encourage initial surveys and then just in-person conversations directly with hourly employees to say, hey, what would make this really valuable for you? What would make you want to download it? What would make your job better? What would make your life better? Because the challenge is a lot of times people buying the technology are so separated from the people who will be using it that they don't even know, even though it's in their own company, they don't even know what's going to make it truly beneficial and impactful. So some examples of things that we've seen that have been triggers, things like internal job postings. So if you work at a really big company and you work on manufacturing line A and you work with Johnny, but he listens to country music and that's not really your style, you want to be looking at those internal job postings all the time so you can move to a different line, right? Or so you can move up in your career or whatever the case is. So internal job postings have been a trigger for certain companies. Being able to get their schedules on their mobile device is a trigger for a lot of people because, believe it or not, there's still a lot of hourly employees that in order to figure out when they have to be at work, they've got to call and say, hey, did the schedule get posted today? Can you tell me if I have to come to work tomorrow? So, those kind of things that really make their lives better can be a really big deal. Benefits information, that's another thing that every employee wants to have better access to. Cafeteria menus sometimes, if you work at a company that has those, employees really care about that. They care about their food. So lots and lots of examples there, but really it comes down to figuring out, okay, I need to look beyond my agenda if I want this platform to have some adoption. I need to provide real benefits for my employees.
Well, and I would think that the example of the schedule kind of really hits me. So I was scheduling some visits with some relatives of mine who are hourly workers and who had to check their schedule to see when we could arrange to meet because I was coming from out of state. And they're like, well, the schedule's not posted yet, so I can't tell you, when I'm working. And I'll go in tomorrow night and I'll see what the schedule is. So
yeah, exactly. And if you've been at desk-based work, I think that's a beautiful example too of, we almost can't relate sometimes. If you've been sitting at a desk for years and years and years, you can't relate to the fact that your schedule changes every week, right?
Yeah.
Just things like that. And then, what you realize is your relatives couldn't plan their lives because they didn't know their schedule. And that's incredibly frustrating. And just being able to get that by opening your phone instead of calling in or going to the store or the facility is a really big deal.
Well, I imagine if people are calling in to get their schedule, that's a disruption from the workflow day to day. So it's not just a great benefit for the employees to be able to get that access, but there's some other ways that it's going to improve the business for the business.
Right. If the manager has to take 5 phone calls about schedules, within a matter of 2 hours, that's a huge interruption. And that's certainly not time that's earning them money.
Right, right. So I obsess a little bit about employees getting a voice and being able to get their information up the chain. We've all seen the stories like Undercover Boss, where the CEOs go undercover and get some great insights by working with the frontline employees. So, do you have one or two favorite stories from some of your customers about people speaking up and how that made a difference in the business?
Yeah, couple of different examples that I've seen. One is in regards to safety. So a lot of times employees might see something that's not safe that's happening, especially in an industrial environment, a manufacturing facility. So I've seen employees be able to capture, even with a quick photo, something that's not safe, something that's gone unreported, and then the manager be able to send that out and say, hey, this is the kind of thing we've got to report. This is the kind of thing that's going to keep us safe. And that's the kind of thing that impacts real lives, right? If you're operating in a safe environment, that's really dangerous and could result in your employees being really hurt or injured. So I think that's a huge one. We have a customer that created a account within an account with us. They call it broken windows. And so it gives employees the ability to report something that they see that's broken or that's out of place, or that is a way that it shouldn't be. And so really kind of crowdsourcing your eyes and ears all over the company, because sometimes I might see something and not know who can fix it or who can do anything about it. But this gave employees a place to report their concerns so that the facilities team could go and then do something about it. I think that's really, really impactful.
Very cool. That reminds me of another story from a different podcast where a woman was talking about an international company that was going to work with this company in the U.S. and the Japanese business person went into the restroom and saw a broken window, and they stopped the deal altogether because if you don't take care of your broken windows, you're not going to be able to take care of our business.
Yeah. And one other example that I have on that one too, I was working with a manufacturing facility, and it's just one of the biggest buildings you can imagine. It's actually one of the largest buildings in the state of Ohio. And they had found a couple skids worth of material, and nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew where it came from, what it was. Obviously, that could be a security threat, but what they figured, you're in this huge building, is that somebody put this here and they didn't properly label it and they didn't properly store it. And so we've got to figure out, whose it is, where it goes, and what to do with it. And so what they did is they sent out a message and said, hey, if you know what this is or you know where this is, let us know. And so they're basically crowdsourcing their problem solving, giving more employees the opportunity to be the eyes and ears of the company. And they were able to quickly resolve a problem. And as we know in manufacturing, time is money, right? If you're interrupted, if you're not making things, you're losing money.
Right.
And so that's one example I think that has had a real business impact by being able to solve a problem much more quickly with technology and by giving your employees the ability to help solve a problem.
I love that. I love that. The idea of crowdsourcing and let the employees help to solve problems because they want to. They want to be of help.
Yeah.
They want to make a difference. So, okay. Absolutely. Very cool. Very cool. Let me look at my list here. So, are there other important things that organizations should keep in mind when they are trying to set themselves up for the opportunity to give their employees a voice?
Sure. So I think one of the most important things is that it's a safe place and a safe culture for employees to speak up without fear. And digital platforms provide that in a really unique way because you don't always have to go directly to your manager. You can report it to someone else who maybe you're not as closely related to, and maybe somebody that you're not as concerned about. But as a company, you got to be committed to, hey, this is a safe place. This is a place where employees can speak up without fear of being reprimanded. And that's always reinforced when employees do speak up and they receive that positive reinforcement, right? Whether that's the suggestion box that I mentioned, where every time employees speak up, they're getting a response, right? Being able to respond to those. And even if the response is no, even if the response is, hey, thanks for your concern, we'll keep it in mind. But creating that safe place and that culture where, we want this, right? But I think from an organizational standpoint, the tension to be managed there is, right, freedom and control. So there is, it is a concern for employees to maybe have an open forum discussion constantly about every single thing that's going on in the business. There's a place for open forum discussions, but that's not always productive to everyday life in your organization. So figuring out whether it's through technology or through other platforms, events, meetings that you have, when is it appropriate to have a little more control over the conversation versus when is it appropriate for it to be a free-for-all. So, and I don't think, like I mentioned, I think that's a tension to be managed. It's not hey, this is the right solution all the time. There's got to be a time and place for all of it. But tapping into technology plus real life conversations and different settings and events can really help figure out, okay, where are the appropriate channels and how are we managing those?
Okay. So in working then with organizations, it is talking not just about the culture and what they want to accomplish and what the employees need, but also having some real world conversations too, not just a technology based kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important. And, anybody that hopefully works in communications will tell you face-to-face communication is still what employees prefer most of the time. The reality is just that it's not always possible, but you've got to still make time for it. You've got to prioritize it when you can.
Very good, very good. Well, my last question before I kind of open it up and see if there's anything else that you'd like to add to the conversation to the leaders that might be listening. My last question would be, what have been one or two pleasant surprises along the way as you've been involved with Ready App and this part of the world?
One of the neatest things that I've gotten to do is really see the behind the scenes and the inner workings of a lot of organizations. So everything from behind the scenes at some of the largest casinos in the country and see how they really take care of their employees and how they feed them and how they do their laundry and what does that look like and how are they building their culture. That's really neat. And then, on the contrast, to go into a 100-year-old manufacturing facility and see what that culture looks like and see how loyal those employees are and see how talented they are and skilled and how much they value their job and the products that they're building. So it's just been really, really neat to get to see these employees, the companies that they've helped build and really where they're going. So that's been really, really cool. And then, in doing all of that, because a lot of times we go on site for implementations to really understand the culture of the company and make suggestions and guide people. But in doing this, one of the neatest things is seeing and hearing people say, oh my goodness, I get this. This is going to make my life better. This is going to make my job better. I remember one guy specifically that I talked to worked in kind of a back corner remote section of a manufacturing facility that was sort of partitioned off from everything else. And he said, man, if it wasn't for Ready App, I would never know what was going on. He said, I would never get any information if I didn't have this. And he'd been using it for about a year and a half. And I just thought, man, that's the good stuff right there.
Yeah.
This company was working hard on communications, but, all of their efforts just weren't able to cut it in the same way that the technology could really break through that barrier for those hard to reach employees. I've also heard, especially from, think about like a third shift employee, those are the kind of people that always get the news last, right? Or, they're just kind of out of the loop because people don't think about them. The big meetings happen on first and second shift. And so to hear third shift employees say, you know what, I finally get company news now, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Very, very neat. Very neat. Awesome. Awesome. Well, before we sign off, is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you think might be good for folks to hear as they're thinking about these issues within their own company?
I think one of the biggest things that a lot of people come to me with is, I want to do these things. I want to care more about my employees. I want to give my employees a voice. I want to put in technology, but how can I prove the ROI of it? I think we're really in the beginning stages of proving the ROI of a lot of the technology that we have at Ready App, but then across communications. But I would encourage anybody that's thinking about that and looking into that space. I'm reading a book right now called The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni, and it's all about how having a healthy organization is a huge business advantage. And ultimately, we know communication is really what helps build and shape your culture, and your culture is the health of your organization. And so if that's something that you're really investing in and trying to figure out, hey, how do we have a healthier company? How do I justify more communications, better communications with my employees? That's a great resource and a great book to check out.
Very cool, very cool. And I think you're right. I think that is the competitive advantage of the future, is an engaged workforce and getting their brains and the benefit of what they see, being closer to your clients and closer to the processes, and improving things from there. So.
Yeah, it's a huge deal.
Very cool, very cool. Well, Hannah, thank you again so much for taking your time and sharing what you've learned along this journey, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Kelly.
This podcast was brought to you by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com. Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com, or give me a call, Kelly Vandever, at 770-597-1108.